DreAllDay.com.
Tuned in to the show where you learn the discipline to show up day after day to do the work, the confidence to put yourself out there boldly and authentically, and the mental toughness to continue showing up, doing the work, putting yourself out there, even when the success you've expected to achieve has yet to be achieved. And on top of all this, you to use those of personal initiative, which is the go-getter energy that moves me, you, him, her, them, and they to go and make things happen instead of waiting for things to happen. And we put all this together into one bundle, one package, one mindset, one method, one philosophy, one book, one show, one masterclass. Actually, it's more than one book, but we got one book with that title, but it's about 20 books. Actually, 27 books to be exact. Might be 28, I lost count. But anyway, the show is called Work on Your Game. My name is Dre Baldwin, also known as Dre All Day, and the book is also called Work on Your Game. If you do not own that book, then I beseech you to go to workonyourgamebook.com, order your copy of that book. We're going to give you $1,400 in immediate digital bonuses right now while you wait for the book to come in the mail. Now, with all that being said, let's get to today's topic, which is, this is I guess we can call this a woke message that someone sent me that I'm going to reply to. I'm going to read this message part by part, and then I'm going to respond to it part by part right here live on today's show. Now, after I did several masterclasses where I have discussed race and discussed the civil unrest, there's a white guy that I know who I saw use that phrase, civil unrest. I said that's a good PC, no way anybody can be pissed off way of labeling what's been going on in America since I guess it started with the viral video of George Floyd passing away in Minneapolis back in late May of 2020. So with all the civil unrest going on, obviously I've talked about this in a few episodes and I've gotten some responses. Now the George Floyd episode was I didn't even give it a number. So it came after episode 1479. I just put it out as a special, and then 1480 came after that. So this is the only episode. I think there are only 2 episodes ever. It was the Kobe Bryant, when Kobe died in January, and then the George Floyd episode, the only 2 episodes that do not have their own whole number in the history of the Work on Your Game Masterclass, which means whatever number episodes we got, we actually have a couple more that don't have numbers. But all that being said, after I did the George Floyd episode, I also talked about the victim stuff that I didn't like the way that many people were portraying themselves or ourselves as black people in America as victims. Talked about that in Masterclass number 1524. I also talked about how to combat white privilege strategically if you are black living in America, if you consider white privilege to be something that needs to be combated. I talked about that in Masterclass number 1534. I also talked about 1533. The next episode, 1534, I talked about what to do when your freedom of speech is not free, when being able to say what you actually want to say, when you're not threatening anybody, you're not yelling fire in a crowded theater, but you still can be attacked and persecuted for saying something that people disagree with, how to handle that. That was 1534. And then in Masterclass number 1535, I talked about systemic classism and why it is not, as many people said, or at least when we were talking about the sports world, always bigger than money. In many ways, not bigger than money. That classism was more of a problem than, for many people, the people who are really feeling the effects of what a lot of people refer to as racism is really just because they don't have any money, they don't have any resources. I explained that all out in Masterclass number 1535. So anyone who doesn't understand what I mean, please listen to those masterclasses before you respond. Now, this gentleman, I believe it was a male, I do not know his name, but he sent me a message, and I'm looking at his profile photo, it looked like it was a guy. He sent me a message to respond to what I talked about in Masterclass number 1535. This particular response that he sent, it encapsulated much of what I have seen and hear, especially from young people, especially on social media, people who have echoed many of the same talking points with a lot of conviction. And these are not just people who are talking to me, because for those of you who listen to this show, I don't really dive that deep into all of this stuff. When I actually let me say that a different way. I don't talk about it every day, but when I do talk about it, I will talk about any aspect of it, any issue of it, and I make myself very clear exactly how I feel about it. The thing about that is, number one, I don't push myself to the extremes of any side of hardly any topic. I do on the topics of discipline, confidence, mental toughness, and personal initiative, but on these topics of race, on these topics of what's going on between the white people in America, black people, and when it comes to politics, the Democrats and the Republicans, the lefts and the right, the police, and what's going on in certain neighborhoods and how things have occurred I see a lot of people jump to far extremes and they jump to these conclusions really quickly. And I understand why, because it works. Jumping to conclusions and jumping to a far extreme on a topic, especially something like race, where everyone has an opinion because everybody has a race. Not everyone is involved in politics. Not everyone cares about sports. Not everyone cares about discipline, confidence, mental toughness, but everybody has a race. So everyone has an opinion on that. So talking about race will get you a lot of attention quickly, and talking about race in a polarizing way will get you a ton of attention, and it won't go away as long as you keep talking about it. Now, there are plenty of examples out in the world for this, and you can talk about it from any angle. Doesn't matter what side you're on or who you support. If you are polarizing and you go to an extreme, people will talk about it forever. Now, since I tend to be, I guess you could say, my stance on these things when it comes to race, some of you can tell me. I mean, I'm not it's not easy for me to see myself in the mirror at this, but I think I'm pretty moderate when it comes to this. I'm more of a centrist on these topics. Even though I am black and live in America, I do not immediately vilify the police. Even though I understand why some people feel how they feel about, let's say, for example, President Donald Trump. I am not in extreme in bashing Donald Trump. There are some things I've said about Trump that people could actually learn from if you pay attention to what he's doing, and you can get out of your feelings and your emotions about the guy. I talked about this in Masterclass number 1232. What you could, should, and will learn from President Donald Trump. And I should have put an asterisk there and in parentheses added, if you can pay attention and get out of your feelings and out of your emotions, which a lot of people have been unable to do over the last 4 years, but that is not my business. I can't change the way that people choose to think. All that said, I'm saying that I tend to take a moderate position on a lot of these things. I guess what people will call moderate, simply because I'm not jumping to either side. I'm not picking a side and I'm not polarizing in it. So I guess you would have to call that moderate, even though I think it's more, I would consider it more objective is the better way of calling it. But everybody thinks they're objective, right? So every human being thinks they're objective, but actually none of us are. I try to be as objective as I can be, knowing that I'm a human and that I am subject to subjectivity just as much as you are. Actually, probably not as much as everybody, but I'm subject to it in some level. But anyway, this gentleman sent me this message on Instagram. And again, each point I'm going to lay out what he said and I'm going to respond to it. And I aim today, I want to be clear, because a lot of the things that I'm going to lay out that this gentleman shared with me, and we're going to put this whole episode we're putting out on the public feed, because I want everybody to hear this. So Nico's the audio guy. So Nico, you're hearing this, put this whole episode out on the public feed, because I want everybody to hear everything that I'm saying here. And I'm saying that here because I might forget to tell Nico that. So he's going to put this whole episode out on the public feed, because I'm going to take everything that this guy said. I'm going to respond to every single point. And I want to be clear about something. I am aiming today, as I respond to this gentleman's points, because I did not agree with everything that he said. And many of the things that he said, I think you'll understand what I think about him when I talk about him. But I aim today not to invalidate his ideas or his points. And if you happen to agree with some of his ideas and points, I know for a fact that I have some listeners who agree with the things that this gentleman said, because I've had conversations with these people. I'm aiming not to invalidate your ideas or your beliefs, but I'm aiming to inform/remind you of some truths about life and its many imperfections. And these truths about life and the truths about life's imperfections are not going away simply because, I know for a fact that they're not going away, because life is inhabited by these imperfect creatures that we call humans. Not cops, not white people, not Republicans, not black people, not people on the left, not woke individuals, not the BLM movement, or whatever you want to call that. Humans. All of those are humans, and human beings are imperfect. Therefore, whatever many imperfections that exist in life are never going to go away, no matter how much of whatever you think is going to cause the quote-unquote change that people have been talking about. It ain't going away, because human beings will always fuck it up. All right, all that being said, by the end of this episode, you had two choices. Let me tell you what your two choices are going to be by the time I get done talking today. Number one, option A. Let's say option A is you can say the serenity prayer, which is, Lord, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. That is the serenity prayer. You can either choose that, which means accepting things that ain't changing and changing things that can change, or B, here's your other option. You can rage against some of the human principles that you will never have the power to alter. You can choose to do either one. It is 100% your choice. I have no stake in what you choose to do. Hopefully you make it the choice that works best for you, and you got to decide what that is. But let's get into it. Point number one, the topic once again today is a woke message that I received. And the reason I'm responding to this one is not necessarily because of the individual person who said it. I don't even know who this person is, but obviously this person is a listener, so I respect them for listening and sharing in a rational and a respectful way their dissent with some of the things that I said in masterclass number 1535, which was about systemic classism. So let's begin. I am quoting the beginning part of this person's message. So each point, I'm going to quote a little bit of what he said, then I'm going to respond. All right, and I'll make sure you understand what part I'm in as I'm talking. All right, point number one, quote, in response to episode 1535 of your podcast, which you should have called a masterclass, but we'll let that go. Your argument is valid for why the situation we have today is classism, but we shouldn't ignore the fact that racism is the reason why blacks are more likely to have less resources than whites, close quote. So this is how he begins. Okay. First of all, let's make sure we are clear on the difference between correlation and causation. Correlation means one thing happens and another thing happens, and they just both happen to happen back to back or at the same time, but they are not related in any other way. Causation means something happens and then something else happens, and it happens because of the other thing. For example, if I drink a whole lot of alcohol today and I wake up tomorrow with a hangover, that is causation. If I do the rain dance on my balcony and it rains tonight, that is correlation, because my rain dance did not make it rain, even though I may be fooled into believing that my correlation is actually causation. And this is a mistake that a lot of people make in many areas of life. Oh, this thing happened, it must mean this. I was in Las Vegas not too long ago, late July 2020, and a white woman was in front of us. I posted this on Instagram and also on my Facebook. Any of you who follow me saw this video. White woman was in front of me and three of my friends, and I'm 6'4" tall. They're both taller than me. The three of us are behind her. It's four people to an elevator. She was by herself. So just by simple calculation of four of us three and her, we're going to share the next elevator. She jumped on the elevator before that with an elevator that was already full. And who knows why she did it? We don't know. We didn't ask her. We never seen her. We had no way of identifying this woman. And I asked just an open question, is it because this woman is racist? And I was very surprised by many of the answers. I was surprised but not surprised by many of the answers of people like, yeah, she's racist. What if they were white guys? She wouldn't have did that. Or what if this? Or what if that? Yeah, she was just trying to avoid black people. And one of my friends who was with me, he even went as far as to say, well, she's racist because she broke the COVID rules to get away from three black guys. Or first of all, who cares about the COVID rules? I mean, I'm not saying it that way, but that's not the issue. No, we can't call a woman racist because we don't know why she did what she did. You know, maybe she was trying to get back to her room quickly. Maybe she needed something to eat. Maybe she needed to go to the bathroom. We have no idea why she did it. And there were many women who spoke up and said, no, there could be many reasons why. And listen, if I was a female, maybe I would have avoided getting in an elevator with three big black dudes when I'm 5 foot nothing and I don't know them either in a foreign place. I might have avoided it as well. But anyway, my friend, he seemed to attribute this to causation. This white woman didn't get in the elevator with us because she was racist. That is causation, and that is a super reach and assumption. I would say it's correlation. She did avoid the elevator with us, but we were black, and she is white. Those are all correlated, but there's no way we can prove causation. All right, everybody understand what I just said? If you don't, hit the rewind. Now, answering this gentleman's point, again, he said, we shouldn't ignore the fact that racism is the reason why blacks are more likely to have less resources than whites. This is so many different directions to go with this statement. Statistics show that whites have more wealth than blacks in aggregate. All right, so that is true that whites have more wealth than blacks. So if you grabbed a random white person in America and a random black person in America, and you asked me or you or anyone else to gamble your own money, your hard-earned money, which person probably has more wealth? It would be a smart, probabilistic bet for you to put your money on the white person having more wealth than the black person, simply because of the statistics that we have available and that we know to be true. Okay? So yes, this is accurate. However, there are exceptions, and there are poor white people too. As I talked about in masterclass number 1535, there are poor white people who get paid just as little attention to as poor black people or black people who feel like they are victims of quote unquote the system. Now I want to be clear about something. Just because a black person statistically is likely to have less wealth than a white person does not prove racism. All right, that is a bullshit argument. That is simple correlation. It is not causation. All right, if you think racism exists and then one of your reasons is, well, white people have more resources than black people, that is a correlation, okay? That is not a causation. And racism doesn't cause a white person to have more stuff than a black person. If it does, then you would have to prove it in some other way besides just laying out these naked facts. The fact is the fact, but it does not make America racist. For example, if we were just going to take raw, naked facts and lay them next to each other and say, okay, well, this fact proves this fact. All right, let's do it again. Let's try it in a different way, in a way that I think all of you would agree sounds pretty absurd. Most NBA players are black. Would everybody agree with that? Does everyone listening to me agree that the majority of players in the NBA are black? All right, people say yes. Now, in the United States of America, black people are only 12 to 13% of the population. Does everyone agree with that? Okay. So how is it possible that in the basketball league, these are the best basketball players in the world, they are highly compensated people, only 13% of the population is black, yet the majority of the players in the NBA are black? Does that make the NBA racist? Are they discriminating against white people? Are they oppressing the white basketball player who really wants to make it? They're just not being given an opportunity. Does that prove that the NBA is racist? Of course it doesn't. All right, that sounds ridiculous. All right, you're probably laughing at the assumption. You're laughing at the fact that I would even pose that question. Is an absurd, what we call the absurd absolute. And this is what some people do when they're trying to quote unquote prove racism. Well, white people have more wealth. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that white person is racist. It does not necessarily mean that America is racist. We would need a lot more context. If a black business owner, for example, has more money than the black employees who work for him, does that mean that the black business owner has been cheating his employees? Does it? Sometimes in life, ladies and gentlemen, people just have what they have. Sometimes you just got what you got. If you have less than another person, it doesn't necessarily mean that that person cheated. It doesn't mean that that person is racist. It doesn't mean that the system is against you. It does not mean that the country is oppressing you. Maybe it just means you haven't acquired what you want to have for yourself yet and somebody else has. Maybe somebody else just has more than you because they got more than you. Maybe they've been working harder than you. Maybe they've been in the game longer than you. Maybe they're just better than you. Maybe they're a better salesperson than you. Maybe they know some things that you don't know. Maybe they know some people that you don't know. Maybe they have connections that you don't have. There could be a lot of reasons why someone else has more than what you have. And to just say that, oh, it's because of racism is bullshit. And let me offer you another point of context when it comes to racism that I want to make sure people understand exactly where I'm coming from. Masterclass number 1378. The topic is racism is legal and other truths that you should accept. This is not me condoning racism. It is me letting you know that racism is legal. It is not a crime to be racist. So if you believe that you having fewer resources than another person is because of racism, here's the problem with that belief. Racism is not a crime, which means it can continue to go on and there is no legal repercussion for you having less than another person if indeed the reason is racism. You always have less. You will always have that complaint and nothing's ever going to change because there's no legislation against racism. All right, you can't do it. So what are you going to do about that? I don't think you have an answer. And I'm speaking to the person who believes that this is the case. Oh, I'm black and I got less than a white person, so it's because of racism. Okay. Let's just say that that's true. Now what you gonna do? Racism ain't a crime. Right? Ain't no law against racism. All right, there's no court judgment that you can get. All right, you can't go on Judge Judy and get her to award you a settlement because of racism. All right, so how you gonna get the money? How you gonna get the wealth that the white person has over you if racism is the reason? All right, you're stuck right now. All right, you got a complaint that you can't change, you can't do nothing about, and you're still at a disadvantage. Now what? Now, who listening to me right now has ever been deprived of money that is rightfully yours due to racism? If you're listening to me right now, I'm waiting for someone to speak up. You're listening to this right now. You are whatever, it doesn't matter what color you are, white, black, whatever. You have been deprived of money that rightfully belongs to you, and the reason why you were deprived of that money is because of racism. You actually have a story that you can tell that proves that, or at least you think it proves it. You can at least claim it. That is because of racism that you're missing a couple dollars in your pocket. If racism is the reason, first of all, you're not going to be able to prove that, because racism is generally it's a thought, it's an idea, right? It's a way of thinking. You can't prove that somebody's racist. I know I've never heard of anyone, very few people I've ever heard who openly will admit, hey, I am a racist. First of all, it's illegal even if it was, but I never hear anybody say that. Most of the time when someone gets accused of racism, they deny it. They say, I'm not racist, if they say anything at all. Very rarely do I hear a person just come out and say, you know what, I am racist, and be serious about it. So since you can't prove that racism is the reason why you're behind or you're missing something or something is not going the way that you want it to go, it makes it a useless argument as far as I'm concerned. If someone sees it differently, you would have to let me know how. Point number 2. Today's topic is I'm responding to a woke message that represents a lot of the wokeness that I've been hearing over the last few months with the civil unrest going on in America. Point number 2. Now I'm going to continue to quote from this DM from this gentleman. Our people, and he's a black guy, our people were enslaved and treated like cattle/property for centuries. That had a devastating effect on our culture. Similar to your examples about the effects of solitary confinement, which I mentioned in 1535. This can mess people's heads up, leading to a poor mentality being passed on for generations. Close quote. Oh boy. I had to take a sip of water before I respond to this one right here. Okay. This right here, what this gentleman said in this part of his DM, this is the most common argument that black people make regarding America's alleged racism. Okay, the racism of America, usually this is the argument that eventually is going to get said anytime you hear a woke individual start talking about America being racist or why a movement for change is necessary or whatever argument they want to make for however they're feeling. Is that we were enslaved for 400 years. This had a devastating effect on our culture. It messes people's heads up and it's been passed on for generations, and that's why black people are still behind these days, and that's why things are still happening to black people. It's still going on to this very day. And then they start listing out the names of people who've died at the hands of police and to justify their argument. All right, all of you have heard this. Some of you listening to this have used this very argument. Please listen very closely to what's coming next. This is the most common argument for America's racism. And let me also tell you one other thing about this argument. This is the worst argument that black people make regarding America's racism. This is the worst. Let me tell you why. Who listening to this right now, today, you personally, was either a slave or a slave owner? If you are a slave or a slave owner, please send me an email, dre@dreallday.com. I would love to have you on the show. Anyone, is there anyone who qualifies? You are a slave or you are a slave owner. Stand up and be accounted for. Slavery in America ended 160 years ago. This is a fact. I think most people would agree. It ended 160 years ago. So even if you are 100 years old today, if I have any 100-year-olds listening to this, I'd love to have you on the show. I got plenty of questions. You are at least one generation removed from slavery. And here's the thing here's the thing that I want a lot of black people to take in. And I want you to take this to heart. Your parents or grandparents or great-grandparents or whomever you can trace your roots back to, their setbacks, their failures, the things that they went through, the things that they endured, whether it was racism, whether it was during the civil rights movement time, whether it was the Prohibition era, whether it was the Great Depression, whether it was the Jim Crow era, whether it was the KKK terrorizing their neighborhoods and terrorizing them and their families, whatever your ancestors went through as a black person in America, none of it is an acceptable excuse for you today. I'm pausing for that one to sink in. If you're 23 years old today, your mom is 47, your grandmom is 70, what does slavery had to do with you and the work you're doing every day right now? Tell me, what does slavery got to do with you? You work at Walmart, you go to college, you own your own business, you got a YouTube channel. What slavery got to do with you? When were you a slave? You never saw slavery, you never experienced slavery, you have never been owned by another human being. What does slavery have to do with you? Now let me be clear, because I know the rebuttals that come from saying something like this. I am not discounting the fact that slavery occurred. Listen, I am a Black American. I got just as much claim to that argument as anyone else. I'm not discounting the fact that slavery existed. I'm not discounting the horrors of slavery or the civil rights movement or the Jim Crow era or any of the things that happened to our ancestors as Black Americans back in the day. I'm not discounting the fact that it occurred, okay? I am acknowledging that it did happen. But all those people who went through it, I'm talking about slavery specifically here, and all those people who went through it, who perpetuated it, who created it, who were in charge of it, who wanted it to keep going, all of those people are dead now. Every single one of them. All of them dead. Does anyone object to that point? That being said, I don't want to hear these sweeping points about slavery coming out the mouth of a Black person living in 2020. What are you talking about slavery for? You was born in 2002. You talking about slavery. You ain't never been no slave. You ain't never been close to being a slave. So tell me how you and your life is directly affected by slavery today. This argument that this gentleman made, he said we were enslaved and treated poorly for centuries. This is a fact. This had a devastating effect on our culture. Now, this is questionable because that is a very subjective statement. He said this can mess people's heads up, another subjective statement, and it leads to a poor mentality being passed on by generations. For that statement right there, I say speak for your fucking self. Now, I ain't got no poor mentality. All right, I'm Black just like you, 2 Black parents, just like assuming this guy has 2 Black parents. Anyone else listening to this, whether you got 1 or 2 Black parents, don't attribute the poor mentality that you choose to have because slavery existed. Don't attribute that to every Black person. That's not us. If you have a poor mentality, that's your choice. Maybe your parents taught it to you. That's your decision. I'll keep it real right here on this show. I remember when I started reading more stuff about money. I was never taught about money growing up. I was not taught about entrepreneurship growing up. I was taught the normal path. Go to school, get good grades, graduate, get a job, live happily ever after. That's what I was taught. I deviated from that path when I started getting new information. But I started to learn when I started to read about money that I had some very poor habits and poor mindsets around money. And it wasn't because of slavery. It wasn't because of white people. It wasn't because of the racism of America. It's because I was never taught anything different. I was modeling what I had been shown by the adults that I grew up around. And that's not a knock on them. They only knew what they knew. People don't know what they don't know. We call it unconscious incompetence. When people don't know something, they can't help you with it. They don't even know that they don't know it. They can't do anything about it. They can't even get the information. They're unaware of their own ignorance. I don't blame that on America or white people. I don't even blame my own parents for it. I had to take responsibility. I was the one. I went to college. It's a big ass library. Any of you go to college, there's a library on that campus. There's 10,000 books in there. How many of them you read? Amazon, Audible. This show right here, how much information is out there that can help you change whatever mindset you have whenever you feel like it? How much are you taking advantage of it? And how much are you making excuses? I don't understand how you could be 35, 54, 26, living in America today as a Black man or woman. You're talking about slavery that ended in the 1860s. And you're saying a poor mentality that got passed on for generations. Well, what the fuck is the problem? Why you still got a poor mentality? If you're aware that you have a poor mentality, why the fuck are you not doing something about it? That's my question. If you feel like a poor mentality was passed on to you because your great grandmother was a slave and they raised your grandfather and they raised your father and then they raised you and you are recognizing, this guy put this in the words, he said this, leading to a poor mentality being passed on for generations. Whatever you consider to be a poor mentality, if you can identify that you have it, why the hell are you not doing something to change it? You're choosing to take some mental conditioning that was passed on to you from the people who raised you. You recognize that as a poor mentality, which he is saying is the context of the way he's saying it is that is a bad thing. And he's saying that, well, that's the reason why, things are messed up, a poor mentality passed on for generations. I ain't got a poor mentality. All right, Jay-Z don't have a poor mentality. Puff Daddy don't have a poor mentality. 50 Cent doesn't have a poor mentality. All right, LeBron James, I think we could generally say he doesn't have a poor mentality. Barack Obama doesn't have a poor mentality. Now, I know I'm naming people who are famous and very well known, but there's plenty of other people who are not well known. They're not prominent. They're not public figures. They don't have poor mentality. Any black people listening to me right now who would agree you do not have a poor mentality? Okay, there's a bunch of you nodding your heads right now. So let's not ascribe, slavery led to black people having a poor mentality. No, that's bullshit. I completely reject this idea. I reject this part of his statement. Completely reject, 100%. Deposit returned. Now, did slavery exist? Yes. Did it have a devastating effect on our culture? That is subjective, what you mean by devastating and what exactly you're referring to when you say culture. But did it devastate some people? Yes. Can this mess people's heads up? Yes. Can it lead to a poor mentality being passed on for generations? Speak for yourself. That's a case-by-case thing. Just because you went through something bad doesn't mean you got to carry it on and keep talking about it and keep thinking about it and passing on to your kids and passing on to their kids and knowing about it, allow it to continue to exist in your own mind because something bad happened to people 3 generations before you. Why are you still carrying that? What's your problem? Everybody who was a slave or slave owner ain't alive no more. They all gone. I went and Googled the Holocaust. The Holocaust, I think most people have an idea what it is. I'm not going to go into detail of it because I'm not an expert on it. I'm not even an expert on slavery, but I do know when it ended and I do know that it existed. I know the Holocaust existed. And I know factually that it ended in 1945. What was the Holocaust? A whole bunch of Jewish people were persecuted, run out of their countries, run out of their homelands, had everything taken from them, stripped from them. Many of them were executed, killed. Not enslaved, murdered, just for being Jewish. They didn't even get to go through slavery and at least live as a slave. They were murdered just for the fact of being Jewish. There are people living today, 2020, who went through the Holocaust and are still alive to this day, walking this planet today. What I read, and if there are any Jewish people listening to this, you can check me if I'm too far off on what I read here. I read that the Jewish world population today in 2020 would be double what it is right now had those 6 million Jewish people not been systematically exterminated during the Holocaust. Whatever number of Jewish people walk the earth today, it would be double that number had the Holocaust not happened. Now, granted, I know more black people than I know Jewish people. Okay, that's my disclaimer before I tell you what I'm about to say next. I know a good amount of Jewish people when I think about it, but I know more black people. But I never, ever, ever hear Jewish people blaming today's problems on yesterday's wrongs. I never hear it. Next time I talk to a Jewish person who I feel like I can talk to about this, I'm going to ask them this question. Actually, any Jewish person I know, I'll ask this question because they're going to answer it whether they want to talk about it or not. I never hear a Jewish person talking about, you know what, is messed up for us here in America today because of the goddamn Holocaust. We can't go to Europe because of the Holocaust. I never hear Jewish people bringing it up in a way to lament their current situation. I never hear Jewish people bringing it up to lament the situation back then. Anytime I hear a Jewish person talk about the Holocaust, they talk about, the people who were lost and what their families went through, and it's much more poignant for them now because a lot of Jewish people who are alive now know somebody, or at the most 2 people removed from someone who actually experienced it and saw it and actually felt it, as opposed to slavery where most of the people who experienced, saw it, and felt it ain't around anymore. And you may be several people removed from finding someone who does when it comes to slavery. But the Holocaust was much closer. It was damn near 100 years later. I never hear a Jewish person talking about it in a way to say like, oh man, the Holocaust, man, we still suffering from that to this very day. I don't hear that. And I need to figure out why. So if there's a Jewish person who listens to this show, send me an email, dre@dreallday.com. And it's serious, this is no bullshit. I want to know from you. Write me an email and let me know why you feel Jewish people don't talk about the Holocaust the way black people keep bringing up slavery over and over again. I really need to know. I'm gonna have some conversation with some Jewish people and find out. Next time I see somebody I know who's Jewish, I'm gonna ask them about this. But I never hear them bring this up. If anything, when I hear a Jewish person talk about the Holocaust, they talk about it in a way that, in reverential terms of the people that they lost, but also in terms of the community of Jews using this as more reason to help each other and be stronger as a unit. This is the reason, this is what leads to us as a people, I'm saying as a Jewish person saying this, sticking together and making sure that we have a strong community and just being, helping each other out. Even if you don't really know the other Jewish person, I'm not saying all Jewish people know each other, just like all black people don't know each other, but there's a strong bond amongst Jewish people because they have a shared history. Black people have a shared history as well. But black people, not everybody, let me be very clear, I'm not saying all black people, I'm not even saying the majority of black people, because I don't know a majority of them to make a blanket statement like that. A lot of black people that I've seen, was a small percentage of all of them, use the shared history of slavery as a launching point for to talk about why things are not good for black people. Things are not good for black people because of this shared negative history of being a slave. I never hear Jewish people with that type of language pattern. And I really want to figure out why that is. And I've been reading some stuff about the Holocaust to try to figure out and see if I can learn. But I'd rather just talk to a person who can just set me straight and make it clear for me. If the current movement, quote unquote, and I got to put movement in quotes right now because I'm seeing it from athletes who say, we got this movement for change, which means absolutely fucking nothing. The movement for change means nothing. All right, what is it? This movement for social justice, which again, another phrase that means absolutely nothing. That the NBA is amplifying this, ESPN is amplifying this, a lot of the left-leaning mainstream media is amplifying this, social media is amplifying it, your favorite rappers and artists and athletes are amplifying this movement, social justice, and change. These three words that keep getting said that are complete empty words. If this movement is about social justice, then that means there can be no exceptions to a movement for social justice. Can we agree? If you're saying social justice, that means amongst all people, we want justice in place and nobody's gonna be treated wrong just because of who they are as a person, right? Just because of the color of their skin or where they come from or their background. If that's what it is about, then there can be no exceptions. So when the NFL and NBA players, and you know who they are, you can Google this, they make idiotic comments about Jewish people. This was a football player named Deshaun Jackson, who plays for the Philadelphia Eagles, at least as of this recording. And then it was co-signed by a former NBA player named Steven Jackson, co-signing, doubling down on the dumb things that Deshaun Jackson said. And he was saying things that weren't even accurate, but it was still stupid. You can't dismiss that as, oh, well, this is just a distraction from the social justice movement. That makes no fucking sense. If it's social justice, that's for everybody. That means we can't go around making sweeping, generalizing comments, negative comments about any group of individuals based on the color of their skin or their religion or their race or where they're from, et cetera, et cetera. It's not just only when it's a black person that we cause an uproar. It needs to be uproar when it happens to anybody. If it's about social justice. If, operative word. I don't think it actually is. I think everyone here can agree that something that's wrong is wrong, period. All right, to quote Martin Luther King, he said, injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. And people like to quote Martin Luther King when they're talking some pro-black shit. Okay, so if some athlete, a famous person who happens to be black, says some stupid shit about another race or another religion or some religion or some group of people, and nobody really says anything. It's not really a lot of noise. There's no uproar about it. ESPN says nothing. The NBA says nothing. The NFL doesn't say much. There's no uproar in attacking him for saying that. Imagine if a Jewish person had said some negative stuff about black people. What would have happened then? Now, see, that right there is one of the reasons why when people talk about this quote-unquote movement for social justice and change, they want to know where I stand on it. This is one of the things that causes me to question, like, what the fuck is this? What is it really? Just say what it is. Like, I know what it is. It's about getting more attention to the black cause or the plight of black people when the person or people who are the perpetrators or the antagonists happen to be white. That's what it is. We all know that this is what it is. We all know this is the game. So when somebody says something about, well, what about black on black crime? Well, you're distracted. You're changing the point. You're changing the subject to make it about something else. Well, if it's about the life of black people, then a dead body is a dead body. But the dead body doesn't matter unless it's a white person who did it. We all can agree that this is what's happening. I don't think anyone can say that that's not what's going on. All that being said, let me not get off the point here. Martin Luther King, again, injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. Many people have conflated this social justice movement with the Black Lives Matter slogan, statement / movement / organization. So Black Lives Matter is like 4 different things that you gotta separate what you're talking about when you say it, right? So if people should care when black life is disregarded, that means everybody should care when anyone else is shown that same disregard, right? But this point can't be given to a person who is more led by emotion than they are rational thought. And this is the challenge that we have, especially when it comes to on social media, in the mainstream media, is that, especially social media, let's just say social media, that people are much more led by emotion than they are rational thinking. Because if people thought rationally, we wouldn't have a lot of stuff that's going on right now wouldn't be happening, because people would just say, all right, rationally speaking, when people are rational, we get more measured responses, more measured statements, and overall just a more measured society. But right now we got a lot of civil unrest, right? That's because people are much more led by emotion and rationality. And it's not necessarily a wrong thing, because we're human beings. I talked about this in the George Floyd episode, that people react to things emotionally, even though logically speaking, if everyone was logical, there wouldn't have been the uproar about the George Floyd thing that there was. But because people are people, they're human, there's going to be emotional blowbacks to things, and I accept that. I made that clear in the George Floyd episode. If you didn't hear it, you can go listen to it, and I said this. Many of the quote-unquote leaders of this quote-unquote movement, whichever movement you want to refer to, social justice change, Black Lives Matter, whatever, I've already spoken on this. A lot of them are more emotionally driven than rationally driven, and when they're emotionally driven, as long as they have a certain amount of influence, they influence other people to be emotionally driven. So if a leader of a movement says, we were enslaved for all these years, and we were treated poorly, and America was racist back then, and that led to a lot of people's mental devastation, and it's been passed on for years, and it's still going on now. If a person with influence says that, then a whole bunch of the people that they influence, they're going to repeat the exact same thing. Now, this gentleman who sent me the DM, I don't know who he follows online. I'm sure he follows some of these quote-unquote leaders of this quote-unquote movement, and I don't know, this is where he gets some of these statements from. I've heard a lot of people say these exact same things. The reason why I'm just using his as a proxy for everybody who's been saying these things, not about him personally. Again, I don't even remember who exactly it was that sent this, but as you can see, as you can hear, some of you have been saying these same things, and I'm just making sure I address all of it here. Let's move on to point number 3. Today's topic is my response to a very woke message. We got 4 points here. Very woke message that I got from someone regarding episode number 1535. Number 3, now we are quoting again. Even after being freed, especially during the height of blatant racism, there were always racist white people trying to prevent blacks from being successful. There are countless examples of this. The Tulsa Massacre, Manhattan Beach, to name a couple. All right, close quote. Okay. Here we go again. This is another, let me break down what just got said in this part of the message. First of all, he said, especially during the height of blatant racism. So let's just say he's talking about maybe the Jim Crow era, or let's just say the era after the Civil War. So black people are technically free, not slaves anymore, but the civil rights movement hasn't happened yet. So this is about 100 years, okay? So let's just say this 100-year period he's referring to, okay? He says there were always racist white people trying to prevent blacks from being successful. Well, newsflash, there are still racist white people trying to prevent blacks from being successful. Let me tell you something else. There are racist black people who are preventing blacks from being successful because they are keeping them in the past by continually repeating these talking points, these woe is us talking points of things that they personally have never experienced. No one alive whom they are talking to has ever experienced, but they keep bringing them up as I'm just trying to understand why I keep bringing these things up. There are plenty of bad things that have happened in everyone's life. Do you keep replaying those bad movies? What's the point of replaying a bad movie? Are you trying to make yourself feel worse? I'm just trying to understand what's the game here. I got a whole section in my book called Work on Your Game. It's about stop replaying bad movies. It's in a chapter called Bad Mental Errors That Good People Make. That's the name of the fucking chapter. Bad mental errors. One of them is replaying bad movies. Something happened in your past that was not good. It was not productive for you. It did not help you. You do not want it to happen again. Why do you keep thinking about it? Why do you keep replaying it? Why do you keep talking about it? Why do you keep rehashing that past thing? Why do you keep doing it? Now, I may replay a bad movie. Let's say if I'm working out, I want to get myself hyped and excited. I want to bring in some of my competitive energy. I might think about some opponent that I want to defeat or somebody talking trash to me 3 weeks ago. I might use it that way in a productive way that's going to help me produce. But when it's over, I can turn that off like a light switch. But us as a people, as black people, why do we keep replaying this bad movie of racist periods in America before the Civil War when black people were slaves, before the Civil Rights Movement when there was a lot of blatant racism going on and it was legislated. There were laws that allowed this racism to continue to go on. I accept that all of this is actually absolutely true. Why do we keep replaying this bad movie? Why do Jewish people not replay the bad movie of the Holocaust publicly? Why are they not doing it, but we keep doing it? And I'm bringing up Jewish people as an example because they have every right to replay that bad movie. Theirs was more recent than ours. Why are they not replaying a bad movie when we keep replaying ours? I'm just trying to figure this out. If somebody can help me out why this happens, I really want to know. And then he goes on, this in the DM, I'm just reading again from what he said. He said there are countless examples of this. So he starts giving these anecdotes of things that have happened. Well, of course, there are countless examples of everything. So whenever I hear a black person these days who's in the woke group talking about the bad things that have been done to black people, they start giving all their anecdotes. So the Tulsa massacre was the Black Wall Street when the whole neighborhood got burned down because of an accusation by a white person. There was the Emmett Till situation when a young man was brutally brutalized and murdered because a white woman made an accusation about him that she later admitted was a lie. When you have the George Floyd situation, you have Ahmaud Arbery, you have Breonna Taylor, you have Tamir Rice, you have Freddie Gray, you have all these people who have been done wrong, at least in the eyes of many people, done wrong either by a white person or by a cop in America. And it just looks, and the more examples you give, the stronger, at least it appears that when people are saying these things, the stronger they're building their case for America being racist. Because I can give you this example, this example, this example. I had a conversation with a friend of mine not too long ago, and he was doing this. He's woke. All right, he won't admit to being woke. When I actually got direct with him and said, all right, you're woke. And he was saying a lot of anti-white things. I said, dude, you're actually racist. You're black, but you're racist. And he was woke. He wouldn't admit to it when I was actually putting it directly in his face, but he was absolutely saying some racist shit. He was sitting around a bunch of black people saying it. So for those of you who are not black, some black people say a whole lot of anti-white things when they're only around black people. And if you were to call them out on being racist, they wouldn't admit it, but they are actually being racist. If white people did that, we call them racist, right? But anyway, he was doing this similar to what this guy's doing in his DM. And he was saying to me, Dre, look, and he started giving all these examples. He told this story of his grandparents told him these things that happened to black people back in the days. And this thing happened to him. And then there was someone else at the table who said, well, yeah, I got pulled over by a white cop. This is a black guy talking. I got pulled over by a white cop. And the first thing he said was, do you have a gun in your car? Or he said he got pulled over for his tints. And he said, I had all my windows down. So how the cop know what my tints are? I said, isn't your back window tinted, motherfucker? That's how he knew. But anyway, people giving these examples, right, of how America's racist or cops are racist or white people are racist. And they have these examples, these anecdotes of certain things that have happened to black people that they think is proof of racism. And I say, well, listen, for every one story that you have of that you think, quote unquote, proves racism of cops, white people, America, etc., I can give you 10 stories of black people who succeeded, black people who are successful, despite the fact that the cops, white people in America are racist. I give you examples. And this gentleman who I was talking to, he knows who he is, and I'm pretty sure he's listening. He's a business owner. He has a college degree. He is by all intents and purposes, by all accounts, if you were to look at him without actually looking at him personally, if I was just to lay out his resume, he is a successful black man in America. He's married, he has a family, he owns a business, he has a college degree. This guy is doing well, yet he has all these anecdotes for why America is racist. And I even challenged him. I said, tell me when something has happened to you personally that proves America is racist. He didn't have much to offer. But he kept giving me all these talking points that he continued to repeat. And this is what I keep seeing from black people. And this is something that I said. I made this very clear. I said this on Twitter. And I may have said it on Instagram as well. I probably did. Maybe in my Instagram story. Why is it that I can understand, let me back up. I can understand if an unsuccessful black person wanted to lay out their case for the racism of America. A person who's unsuccessful. Let's say you're some loser. You've been in and out of jail on weed charges and robberies and doing stuff you ain't supposed to be doing. You're a deadbeat dad to your kids. You don't have a job. You're barely making ends meet. You're sleeping on the subway and on the bench. I could see that person making a claim for America being racist because they could point to their own failures as the reasoning. What I don't understand is when successful black people who are actually achieving and doing well, if you were to just look at their life on paper, why they are pointing out all these woe is us things about black folks when they are actually achieving and doing good. I just don't get it. I don't understand why this continues to happen. And then this is the response that people usually say, oh, just because I'm successful, I'm not supposed to point things out. No, that's not what I'm saying. You can point out things that have happened in the past. Here's what you could do. Instead of pointing out, oh, these are all the reasons why America is racist towards black people and is working against us. You could say, look, yes, slavery happened. Yes, there was the Jim Crow era. Yes, before civil rights, we didn't have civil rights. Yes, there are still racist people walking around America. Yes, there may be some bad cops out there who also happen to be white. Yes, I think whoever is racist, whatever famous person you want to claim is right, all of those things are true. And despite all that, I still created success. Let me tell you how to do that. Why don't we have people doing that? Why can't we have that conversation instead of it being, hey, I'm a successful black man, but let me tell you all the reasons why America is racist anyway and why it's still horrible for us and why it's still terrible despite the fact that I have succeeded despite all of this, but I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about how it's terrible for us. I don't get that. And there are many super prominent black people doing this. LeBron James is a good example. When he allegedly had the N-word spray painted on his house, I believe it was 2018 or 2017, right before the NBA Finals, he went to a press conference and he actually brought up the name Emmett Till. This guy had the audacity to bring up the name of a person who was murdered, a black boy who was murdered, and he drew a parallel between what happened to that black boy murdered to him getting the N-word spray painted on his house allegedly. That was a very ridiculous thing to say. And very few people called him out on it. Anybody who did was attacked for attacking a black man. That's crazy. And I don't understand why somebody like LeBron, who came from the type of circumstances that many people end up failures in life, single parent, teenage parent, single parent, moving from house to house, missing a whole chunks of school, damn near getting left behind in school, didn't know his father, he coming from the hood, coming from the ghetto. Only thing he had going for him was playing basketball, and he actually made it and became a success. Why not tell people, here are some principles that I got from making it, despite my circumstances, that you can use to become successful too, instead of giving people more reasons to feel like they can't win in America. I just don't get that. If anybody can explain to me why LeBron chooses that route, well, one reason why is because it sells. It works on social media. It works very well. But if anybody got a better reason than that, I want to hear it. I'm very interested. So let me give a news flash. We're still on point number 3. News flash to the woke crowd that I've already laid out earlier today. Racism is legal. All right. No person ever in history has been tried, convicted, or sent to jail for being a racist. And that's even given that you could actually prove it. You can't prove that somebody's a racist, and even if you could, they ain't going to jail for it. Ain't no crime. You can't even get a parking ticket for being racist. Racism, ladies and gentlemen, is a way of thinking, and you could also call it a way of being, even if somebody wants to be racist. If you think it's a way of being, fine, let's call it that too. Let me tell you the great thing about America. As long as you are not violating another person's civil rights, since we all have them now, you can think or be whatever the fuck you want. If you want to be racist, If you want to hate all black people, you want to hate all white people, you want to hate Jewish people, if you wish slavery would come back, if you wish there was a repeat of the Holocaust, you can think that if you want. You could even say it if you want. That is not a crime. If you hate blacks, whites, Jews, Asians, you have the freedom to feel that way. Am I telling you to do it? No. But if you do, it's your prerogative and it's legal. You can still live freely in America feeling that way. You might not have many friends. You might get attacked on social media. Maybe everybody will unfollow you, but you ain't going to jail. You can live freely with those thoughts and ideas, and you can make them public. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something. Especially the woke crowd, and some of you woke individuals are white too. All right, it ain't just the black people. You cannot police thought. You cannot legislate what other people are allowed to think, how other people are allowed to feel, and you can't really police how people express themselves. Now, there is a lot of policing of people's expressions going on right now. You say the wrong thing on social media, you might get fired from your job the next day. Hey, actually, they ain't even waiting until the next day now. Now it's happening immediately. And let me tell you another thing, aside from the point that you cannot police other people's thoughts. Today when you're listening to this, there are people who are trying to prevent you from being successful. And there are legal ways of doing it. So when this gentleman in the DM said, well, there were whites, racist whites who were trying to stop black people from being successful, there are people still trying to stop you from being successful to this very day. The black people who are preaching to you that you should feel sorry for yourself because you're black in America, they're preventing you from being successful because they're keeping you replaying a bad movie that you ain't never even watched. You never even saw the movie of slavery, but you keep watching it because, I don't know, emotion is like emotional porn for the woke. They're trying to prevent you from being successful right now. How can you be successful and move forward if you keep looking backwards at a bad movie that you already decided you don't like? How? Explain that to me. Life is competitive, ladies and gentlemen. There are people who are going to try to stop you from succeeding simply because for you to succeed, they got to fail. And you may be in a zero-sum game where everybody ain't winning. Sports is a zero-sum game. Attention is a zero-sum game. Anything that awards a trophy at the end is a zero-sum game. Everybody can't always win. Now, was the playing field in life always level for all people? Absolutely not. In 1820, 200 years ago, was the playing field level for black people the same? Was it on this equal footing for black people as it was for white people? Hell no. In 1920, was it completely equal? No, but there were some exceptional people who did achieve success above the average white people, despite the fact that the playing field wasn't level. What about them? Are they the exceptions to the rule? Yes, they're the exceptions to the rule. Can you learn something from them? Yeah, if you would decide to pay attention, but are you trying to be the rule or are you trying to be the exception? You trying to be the story or the statistic? A lot of woke black people sound like they want to become the statistic rather than the story. For those of you who don't understand that analogy, I talked about this again in my book, Work on Your Game, which you can get at workonyourgamebook.com. In life, most people who go after success are going to fail. This is what it is. Most people are going to fail when they go after success. They become the statistics. A statistic that says 99% of people who play basketball never make it professionally. That is a stat, and it's a true stat. The 1% who make it, you know what they become? They become the story. They get to tell their story of how they made it. The 99% who don't make it, they don't get to tell their story. We don't want to hear a story of a failure. We want to hear the stories of people who made it, right? So are there exceptions of people who made it despite the fact that there was racism, despite the fact that there was civil unrest, despite the fact that there are white people who wanted them to fail, despite the fact that some poor mindset got passed on in your family and you continue to pass it on by repeating it? Are there some exceptions who succeeded anyway? Yes, they get to tell their stories. Everybody else becomes a statistic. What are you trying to be? Are you trying to be a stat, just another failure, another rule, or are you trying to be the exception? And this is a choice that you get to make. It's a choice you get to make every day. It's a choice you make every time you think, every time you speak, every time you act. Every time you wake up, you make a choice. Am I going to be a statistic or am I going to be a story? We only hear the stories are the exceptions. Everybody else falls into they blend into the crowd as a stat. Which one you aiming for? Now, was the playing field always level for everybody? All the years that have been going on? Absolutely not. Playing field was not always level. But one thing I will tell you, in 2020, today when you're listening to this, the playing field is as level as it's ever been for all people. This is as equal as the world has ever been. So if you are lamenting or you're feeling oppressed or you're feeling like you don't have any opportunity because the playing field is not equal enough for you, let me tell you something, all right? It ain't never been any more equal than it is right now. Right now is as equal as it will ever be, at least as far as you're concerned, because we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, right? This is as equal as it's going to be. So if you can't create success now, all right, dude, what's your purpose? What are you doing here? Why are you taking up oxygen that could be going to somebody who's actually going to use this opportunity? People of color have more opportunity in America now than they have had at any time in history. So you, who has a smartphone, who has a laptop, who has a data plan, who has Wi-Fi, you ain't got much to complain about. Is it perfect? No. Will it ever be perfect? No. You ain't got much to complain about. And unless your rights have been violated, everything else is part of the game, like it or not. If somebody's hating on you, that's part of the game. Politics working against you, part of the game. Somebody want you to fail because you're black, that's part of the game. Somebody want you to fail because you're female, that's part of the game. People ganging up to try to stop you from succeeding is part of the game. Somebody blackballed you out of your career, that's part of the game. YouTube that demonetized your videos, all right, that's part of the game. All this shit is part of the game. All right, you can't go to court over none of that, none of the things that I just said. It's all in the game. What you need to learn to do is play the game. All right, the saying is, don't hate the player, hate the game. All right, you need to learn how to play the game. A lot of y'all is complaining about the game without learning how to play the game. Masterclass number 1314, hustle, learning to play the game. A lot of y'all thinking like victims rather than thinking like hustlers. Hustlers figure out what the game is and they learn how to play it. They don't complain about the game and talk about why the game is so rigged against them. The game might be rigged against you all the time. What you gonna do? Every game you try to get in might be rigged against you. What you gonna do? Nothing? You just gonna lay down and die? Or you gonna hustle and learn the game? This is a choice, ladies and gentlemen. It's not something that happens to you. This is a choice that you get to make. Point number 4. Today's topic is I'm responding to a woke message that I received from a listener of this show. Point number 4, let me continue with the quote. I'm quoting this gentleman again. He says, we also can't act like racism isn't alive today, but I'm sure you know that. I hope you know that at least, close quote. Okay. Here's my response to that. He says, racism is still alive today. We can't act like it's not. All right. I think I've said this enough, but let me say it again. Racism ain't dying. Racism ain't going nowhere. So any of you who is out, marching, hashtagging, protesting against racism, all right, you are wasting your time. You are pissing in the wind because it ain't going away. Ain't no amount of marching and hashtagging going to change the fact that racism exists. Because racism, for the most part, it exists in the brain. It's the way people think. You cannot police another person's thoughts. You can think you have intimidated or bullied or protested a person into changing the way that they're thinking, but you never know what another person's thinking. No one listening to this has the ability to read another person's mind. So there's no way you can eliminate racism. That is fucking impossible. All right, you are banging your head against a stone wall. Okay, you will never make it. All right, you're running trying to get to the edge of the map. All right, you ain't never gonna get there. All right, you're going to just keep running in circles. So racism exists today? Yes, racism does exist today, but guess what? It ain't going nowhere. It will exist tomorrow. Racism will exist next month. Racism will exist. The day you die, the next day, racism will still exist. Your kids, racism will exist for them. Your great-grandkids, everybody who comes after you, racism will exist. So just because racism exists means absolutely nothing. It will always exist. It's like the sky being blue. All right, clouds exist, raining exists, hot days exist, snow exists, summer exists, trees exist, ants exist, mosquitoes exist. All these things exist. They ain't going away. So are you going to use that, something that ain't changing, as an excuse for your failure? Or are you going to do something despite the fact that these things exist? Or can you just accept that they exist and just do what the fuck you need to do and stop worrying about things that you can't change? As I told you at the top of this, it's serenity prayer. Accepting what you can't change, having the courage to change the things that you can. Like the way that you think and the way that you look at yourself in the mirror. You can change that. You can't change the fact that racism exists. You can't change that a white person might feel how the fuck they feel. All right, you can't change that. The only thing you can control is you. That's only 1% of what happens in your life is what you do. 99% you have no control over. And I see a lot of people fighting against the 99% that they don't control and then wondering why it ain't working. Let's say that we acknowledge that racism is here, as I've already said. Today, tomorrow, the day after. Now what? All right, I agree. Racism exists. Now what? So now we're going to fight against it. We're going to protest for change. All right, what are you changing? You ain't changing a goddamn thing. Racism ain't going away. No amount of hashtagging, protesting, legislating, charitable donations from some white CEO, some white-owned company is going to change the fact that racism exists. That ain't changing a damn thing. Did racism stop your favorite basketball player from signing an NBA contract? Did it stop my friend, the business owner, from doing his thing for his business, or any black business owner who's out there? Does racism stop me from writing a book or having this show every day? What is the point of pointing out racism when you know it's not a crime, and you know you can't change another person's mind, and you know you can't make a thought go away? What's the point of fighting against it? What are you fighting against exactly? What's the end game here? You know, they say that this is a movement going on. Movements have goals. A movement goes from point A to point B. Where's this movement going? What's the end game? How do you know you've actually achieved something? Oh, you're raising awareness. Oh, okay, great. Now everybody's talking about it. So I guess the movement has achieved that. It has raised awareness. We're all talking about it. So that worked. Check. Done. Now what? Somebody tell me? This is not a rhetorical question. You cannot change another person's mind unless they want to change their mind. So therefore, you ain't really changing their mind. I would not recommend that you sign up for the job of eliminating racism. You know, 50 Cent, who I talked about in one of my virtual mentors episodes. I'll tell you which one that was. That was masterclass number 316. His first album was called Get Rich or Die Trying. I'm sure many of you know that. All right, some of you woke motherfuckers, y'all are on this eliminate racism or die trying. All right, the problem is you're gonna die. All right, you're not gonna. 50 got rich. He didn't die trying. All right, those of you on eliminate racism or die trying, you're gonna die trying to eliminate something that you can't even grasp. You can't even hold it in your hand. You can't get rid of it. Now, you can't get rid of what you can't catch. You can't change what you don't control. Listen, I'm not mad at you for trying, because it's your life. You can do whatever the hell you want to do. But you could be using that same resource, time, money, attention, energy, focus, towards empowering yourself and others instead of trying to stop other people from feeling how the fuck they feel. Racism is just how somebody feels. If somebody's racist, they could be listening to this right now and coming up with more reasons to hate black people because they don't like to hear the black people expressing things. Like, they could be racist against me. Is it gonna stop me? No. I decide that. They don't decide that. I decide that. So what is it you want to do? You want to be a victim? You want to be a statistic? Or you want to rage against the machine? You want to bang your head against a stone wall? Or do you want to empower yourself? When someone else takes a look at your life from the outside looking in, let's say you're not around to talk about yourself, they just got to look at what you've done. What do you want them to say about you? You want them to say, well, this person kept replaying the bad movies of things that never happened to them, but it happened to their ancestors, and they use that as their reason to keep talking about it. All right, why? Why are we still talking about these things? Again, I'm not saying they didn't happen. I know they happened. I know they were not great. I'm thankful that I personally didn't have to go through, because otherwise you wouldn't know me. If I did, I wouldn't have this show. There wasn't no podcasting back then, and black person wouldn't have had none. But I take all these things that this gentleman said about what's happening in America. I'm black, he's black, assuming he's black. Yes, let's just say everything that he was saying. Racism exists, slavery did exist, black people were treated poorly, there were not rights, there were white people trying to stop blacks from being successful, there are racist people still walking around this earth to this very day. All of those things 100% true. Now what? Are you going to use that as an excuse to fail, or are you going to use it as something to power your actions, or are you going to do what I'm telling you, which is Acknowledge that it exists. Just like I acknowledge that mosquitoes exist. I acknowledge that it could be humid as fucking Miami. I acknowledge that sometimes it's gonna rain. I acknowledge that when your gas tank is low on gas, you better put some in there or you're gonna stall out on the road. I acknowledge all these things that I can't really control. And then I focus on what I can control. And that's how you become an empowered individual. That's how you become a somebody in life. You wanna be a somebody, you gotta control what you can control. Not complain about what you can't control. Not complain about and continue to watch bad movies that you already decided you didn't like the movie, but you keep watching the movie so you can complain about it. Like, what the fuck are you doing? Work on your game.